the Trump administration has undertaken a series of strikes on civilian boats. These are not military boats. They're civilian. They say drug traffickers, although in some cases it seems like they're fishermen. In some cases it seems like maybe they're both. They're like fishermen who are paid – no, really, like they're fishermen who are paid some money to run a product somewhere. Like people who are trying to make ends meet.
Yeah.
Our forces have killed over 100 people this way. And what's been so striking about it, other than how I think both legally and morally indefensible it is to just essentially murder people on the high seas, is that from the beginning it has been produced as content. Like very Tom Clancy, the sort of they got the unclassified. It looks like an 80s movie, which I think is exactly the kind of genre touchstone for Donald Trump.
Yes.
So the first cut at that answer would be yes, they perform aggression, war, imperialism, foreign policy all as content, all as means of gaining attention, holding attention. I mean, there's the iconic shot of they've got Twitter up during the Venezuela raid.
Oh,
like
yes.
Seeing who's tweeting about
Wild.
it. But then underneath that, there's also the fact that there are real bombs and real guns and real missiles and real people die, and there's real children numbering maybe as much as 150, 180 who are dead in Iran because our missiles or Israel's missiles, still not clear, killed them in a strike. They're doing it for attentional reasons, right? Because the president likes to keep everybody's attention. He has to be at the center of attention. He has to be doing all the time. He has to have you thinking about him. And also they have very old school, I mean, pure 19th century, straight up, no chaser, imperialist ambitions.
Yeah. So it's sort of, it's imperialist ambitions in a vertical video wrapper. In a social media, always on content machine.
And I think there's actually kind of an interesting and profound point to that, which is that you could make the argument that these have always been intertwined. I mean, if you look at the history of American imperialism and the Spanish-American War and the famous Hearst papers in the Yellow Press, that was both about conquest and producing content. I mean, quite famously. And in some ways is sort of the dawn of the American newspaper era. So I think these two things have always been twinned. The sort of history of imperialism is also a history about kind of the propagandistic uses of it to capture and hold the attention of the masses. But I think, yes, their version of it is a very kind of 21st century postmodern vertical video doom scroll version of it.
Right. On tech steroids. You wrote in a piece for the New York Times, unrelated to Iran, I should say, quote, President Trump has a feral, almost pathological genius for getting people to talk about him. You called it suffocating to his opponents. When you think about your role, our role as media, we're both journalists, to not be the foot soldiers helping to fuel that dynamic, when you go tape an episode of your show, let's say tonight, what decisions do you make about how to approach, let's say, what's happening in the Middle East to avoid sort of playing into that hand, to avoid playing into that imperialism on social media steroids?
Well, the thing we can't do is ignore him or what he's doing, right? So, like, the U.S. actually is at war with Iran.
There are real human lives.
The latest account is 1,000 plus Iranian civilians, not to mention we don't know how many combatants or members of the regime. You can decide whether political figures in a regime count as civilians or not.
Human lives are human lives.
Human lives are human lives. So in that sense, it's like he's the president of the United States. He has the nuclear codes. He's now launched multiple forms of extraterritorial killing, let's call it.
Yeah.
So the way that I think we do it is to try to, not do war porn with our B-roll. Like, there is a subtle but unmistakable ideological substrate to certain forms of depictions of war. Try to avoid that. Also, don't let him set the terms of things, which is like, we're not going to play huge chunks of whatever his nonsense is, except to sort of set them up to show why they're lacking. But, like, there's no really avoiding it, I guess is what I would say in the end. Donald Trump being the president of the United States, which is the most powerful nation on earth, having access to nuclear codes and also the full force of the American military, and also attempting to replace the constitutional order with essentially a presidentialist, personalist dictatorship, is the top story of our time. Yeah. And I cover that story every night, and the question is on whose terms do you give attention and what you give attention to. So here's a great example of that. They made an amazing miscalculation in Minnesota. There was this viral right-wing video that was alleging to uncover fraud in Minnesota daycares run by either Somali immigrants or Somali Americans. There has been this huge fraud network there. It's been prosecuted and investigated, in fact, by the U.S. Attorney's Office and by the very prosecutors who would later resign because they didn't like what the Trump administration was doing. The Trump administration saw this and they were like, we want to bring more attention to this. We're sending Bovino and CBP and ICE there. What ended up happening was that they kidnapped people and they killed 2 Americans in broad daylight on camera. Yeah. And that was where all the attention went. And you could see there was this Trump backpedaling where he was furiously posting on Truth Social, like, you should be talking about the fraud. It's like, you just killed 2 people. We saw you all. Then you called them, you slandered them, called them domestic terrorists. You're kidnapping people's neighbors. You're tear gassing high school students.
Yeah,
this is you're marauding.
Yeah. And we can all see it. It's everywhere.
So that was a great example to me of like, right, you're not like, were we paying attention to Donald Trump? Yes, at some level. Was it on his terms? No. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's basically the question we ask ourselves.
Now, your book, Sirens Call, is out in paperback now. It's a great book.
Thanks.
And it's all about this. It's about attention. And you argue that attention has become a commodity in the same way that labor was made a commodity in the early years of industrial capitalism. I'm curious about when you start the clock on that process, right? Like, when did the process of commodifying attention really start? How do you track that through history?
You know, it probably starts with 2 technologies. Commercial billboards and the penny press, the New York Sun. You know, it's 19th century, basically, early to mid, depending on how sophisticated it gets. In both of those technologies, the idea was that you were selling an audience and you had to come up with metrics that you could measure that audience and then sell that audience to advertisers. So early technology in billboards, there would be people who would stand by the corner the billboard was on with clickers.
Oh, wow.
And they would go like this and they'd say, you know, we get 600 people an hour, you know, if you're talking about Times Square or something, or we get 25 people an hour, whatever it is. And then you can go to your advertiser and say, this is how many people are going to see it. The penny press, you know, the big innovation there is that you sell the paper for less than it costs to make the paper. You lose money on every paper, but then you sell the advertising.
Right.
And so that's the initial process. There are multiple iterations. Magazines come in, and then you get radio, and then you get television, and then you get social media and the internet, all of which are getting more sophisticated at measuring that audience and selling that audience. There's always a degree, hilariously about this technology, like there's always a little bit of maybe a bait and switch by the people who tell you they're like, when you sell a magazine, it's like, does everyone look at that page?
Right. Sure.
Do they open it up and read it? Right. Sure. So, and that's been a frustration by the people buying the ads for years. Right?
Yeah.
Like the old thing about, I'm wasting half my marketing budget. I don't know which half.
Right.
Like this thing about how well are you measuring? Do people stay in the room during the TV commercial during ER, or is that when they get up to get a sandwich?
Right.
And if they're getting up to get a sandwich, like you can't really measure that.
Yeah.
Nielsen box just tells you the TV's on. So. What has happened, though, is the global scale that you can sell it at is new, right? So no media company's ever had billions of users before, like these attention companies do now. The amount of data you have about your viewer is orders of magnitude more. The microsecond auctions that you could run in each second about how you're going to serve that viewer and specifically them. So you now have this sort of auction for eyeballs happening in nanoseconds, constantly. And the thing about the algorithm is you don't have to have people making programming choices. There's just a ton of stuff up. You just see what people start to look, and then you serve them that over and over. So, the old model, which was, well, what are we putting on the front page of our penny press, the New York Sun, or what are we putting the 8 p.m. time slot on NBC, or
what content will get you to spend 8 or 9 hours on TikTok is basically the calculus now. It's one that
they don't have to make the choice.
People aren't making it. Exactly.
And that is actually a huge difference.
I'm curious, very much so. In the book, you acknowledge your own sort of role in this economy, right? You're an attention merchant yourself. You're a TV anchor. You're also on social media, right? You film clips for your Instagram account, for MS Now. How do you navigate your own role in that sort of algorithmic attention landscape? Like, how do you I think part of it is sort of how do you grapple with it as a human being? And then how do you think about it strategically?
I think there's a few different ways depending on the platform or the medium. I mean,
Yeah.
I think with my television show, I have been doing it long enough and established, I think, enough of a rhythm and a relationship with viewers that I am not in a position where I have a sense of where attention is flowing, and that's an imperative for me. I mean, I say in the book, it's necessary but never sufficient.
Yeah.
Like, if no one watches my show, then I haven't done my job.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you have
So
not.
I have the first level is that I have to get people's attention, and then the second level is I have to do something worthwhile with it. And sometimes those are intention, because sometimes the best thing to get someone's attention is not that worthwhile to me. That hasn't really been like on a week when we just went to war. That has not been really a problem.
Yeah.
This is one of those weeks where I'm not real tortured about it. Like, the audience's attention is flowing towards the fact we just started a war with Iran. I think that's the most important story. I'm not like internally
No,
torn.
sure, and they come to you because you can help them cut through and understand
But
what's
you know,
going on. And
there was the period where the plane went missing, and I was on air for that, and you know,
yes,
that was
yes.
a 3-month story. And at a certain point, it's like, yes, it's an interesting story. It's certainly a newsworthy story. It's tragic, but
the plane is still gone.
the plane's still gone, and the audience still wants you to talk about it. I mean, that was really a
Yeah,
difficult thing.
yeah.
It really did. Like, the signal and the noise was just keep giving us the plane. I still feel the pressures every day. And on my podcast, I feel the same way too. Like, I just do what I'm interested in the podcast, and I let the chips fall where they may. Social media is interesting. We've been doing more and more vertical video because
Yeah.
everyone does. And
Everyone does.
I think it's such a weird slot machine effect. Like, I did this thing the other day about there's a pretty little notice set of tariff votes in the House that Donald Trump lost that were House votes to overturn some of the tariffs, including the Canadian ones. It actually happened before the Supreme Court struck him down. I did a little thing about, like, this is kind of interesting. Like, he's lost Republican votes on this. It blew up.
Oh, there you go.
And sometimes
it's-
you're like, this one's going to blow up, and then it doesn't. You're like, well, what did I do wrong? And it's unclear to me. I guess if I put more time into this, if this my whole life was like playing the slot machine, maybe I get better at playing the slot machine.
Yeah.
And obviously there are people like Mr. Beast and
Sure,
I think
who are
people
very good at it.
Yeah, but
Well, and I think that's sort of one of the challenges as journalists or sort of purveyors, in my view, of accurate and newsworthy information, is you are competing now not with a couple of other cable news shows. You're competing with Mr. Beast and with cooking videos and, I mean, with everything,
every
single thing in that feed.
Every piece of content is at every moment pitted against every other piece of content ever created.
Yeah. So in many ways, that tariff video doing well is like a little miracle.
Yes.
It's a miracle
No,
of the
it was
internet.
great. Right. But then I was really like feeling myself about it. And I was like, oh, it's awesome. And then my next one, I was like,
Yeah. But the thing is, you essentially have to participate, right? You know what I mean? Like, you can't opt out of shooting host to camera vertical video anymore.
I mean, right. You can.
Well,
but not if you are trying to.
Are you trying to reach a
people.
mass audience
Yeah,
with
I
news
mean,
about tariffs?
Yeah. I mean, this is the problem. First of all, I think vertical video ends up being a kind of terminal point in the development of attentional technologies, just because it's such a slot machine, apex predator.
Yeah.
You know, it's very difficult to compete with.
I want to ask you a little bit about the midterms because we are getting to be at that season. You wrote in that piece for the New York Times I mentioned, you argued that the Democrats' main problem isn't their message. You're reflecting on the Harris campaign. You said her core problem was her inability to get people to hear her message. It wasn't the message itself. So basically an attention deficit, which I would argue still a problem for the Democrats heading into the midterms. I'm curious about your view there and sort of your view on the Democrats' ability to galvanize an electorate online in the way Trump and the GOP were going into the 2024 election. Sort of, has anything meaningfully changed there in your view?
Yeah, so the reason that I said that, I just think it's important. One of the most important pieces of data that we had from 2024 is that amongst voters who said they paid a lot of attention to the news, Harris won by 5 or 6 points. And as you moved further down, like sometimes to literally never, Trump's margin increased.
Yeah.
So, and I say this for two reasons. One is a lot of people like to blame the media for Trump's victory. And it's like, well, the people that consume the most like journalism and news media were the most Harris inclined. So it complicates that story quite a bit. The thing that comes after that is, for a very long period of time, basically I would say from the 1980s until recently, there was a very straightforward kind of theory of attention in campaigns, which was you raised money and then you spent it on TV ads.
Yeah.
One of the points I was making there is like, that's clearly broken down. You can't just say, we're going to raise a lot of money and then we're going to run a lot of ads on what? The local news, who's going to reach who exactly.
Right.
Some of the voters you need, but a lot of voters that you need are not there. So you need to have a theory of like, how do you reach the people that don't consume media, which is like, we used to call like earned media.
Oh, yes, earned media.
So there's like earned media is like, you're interviewing me.
Yeah.
And then there's paid media, which is like you're running ads on TV.
Chris did not pay for this interview.
I did not pay for this interview. So it's like, if they're not going to see your earned media because they don't consume that and they're not going to see your paid media, like you got to come up with some theory.
Do the Democrats have a theory?
Well, I think they've gotten better at it. I mean, I think that the idea that Donald Trump kind of went everywhere in 2024 and talked to all kinds of different podcasters and made all sorts of content, including him like driving around that truck and serving McDonald's.
Oh, yeah.
Dude.
Sorry, none of this is actually funny, but
no, I mean, it was absurd and kind of comical and actually pretty effective.
Yeah.
The kind of thing that like clearly reverberated out through the world past people that consume the news, past paid advertising. So, I think Drummond Mondani obviously was like a huge innovator in this. He
did an incredible
job. The vertical videos. Yeah. Now, it may be the case, like Roy Cooper in North Carolina is incredibly well known. He just won the nomination to be the Democratic nominee. He's going to go against Michael Whatley, the Republican nominee for that Senate seat. Now, Roy Cooper's super well known. He's been elected statewide, I want to say 3 or 4 times. He was the governor for 2 terms. Also, he's going to raise a ton of money. And it may be the case for Roy Cooper. He's got a theory. He's going to raise money and run ads.
Roy Cooper.
And people know who Roy Cooper is.
Yeah.
But like James Tallarico.
I was going to ask you about James Tallarico. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's he's state rep. Jasmine Crockett. He defeated Jasmine Crockett in that contested Democratic primary in Texas. Now, Jasmine Crockett obviously has a theory of attention, which is.
Well, I was going to say, I think that is interesting to me because I feel like they both have theories of attention.
Exactly.
They're just very different.
They are very different, but they both had a sense of how do I become known? How do I make sure that people whose votes I'm going to want or need know even who I am?
Yeah.
My point is that you better have a theory of this.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's based on who you are that cannot be. What you cannot do is you cannot default to what had been the paint by numbers approach for literally decades. I'm going to raise a bunch of money and I'm going to run a bunch of local TV ads. That is not going to work.
I want to ask you about where politics and technology sort of collide and come together. We talked a little bit about this at the top, but when I got to Wired, it was very obvious to me and I think to the team here that covering politics more closely was not an optional decision, right? It was an imperative. There was no space between Silicon Valley leaders and the government, particularly true after Trump took office. You've been a political journalist for a very long time. You spent your career, I think, observing and documenting how power shifts in government. How have you sort of seen that merging of power between those two spheres, between sort of the Silicon Valley elite, the tech industry, and politics and politicians? What does that look like from where you sit?
I mean, I thought the inauguration was such a shocking moment.
Was that shocking to you when you saw them all sitting there? I'm genuinely curious.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that the support wasn't shocking, but we're all going to stand up here with him and because there are downsides to those calculations, and usually they're thinking about those downsides. I think a few things happened. I think as the industry matured from an insurgent industry to an incumbent one, its politics got more right wing. This is not a very surprising trajectory.
It does happen.
It's like, yes, like sometimes if you interview someone who's 23 trying to break into something and then you interview them when they're 63 and they make 6 figures or 7 figures, they have some different politics.
For sure,
And so I think part of it is that. I think part of it is they absolutely all cook their brains on the internet and Twitter and with each other. I mean, I think they just...
like spun each other up.
I think they like just pickled their brains in a brine of reaction.
Huh.
I really do. I just think they're in, like the same way that people talk about this all the time. They talk about, and this is a very common documented almost trope, which is relatives who were lost to Fox News.
Oh, of course.
You know, people that just, you know, they used to have a certain set of views. Maybe they're kind of right-leaning or Republican, and they just started watching Fox all the time. And it almost did something at like a chemical level. They're just angrier and more irascible and wound up. And I just think there's a kind of a online version of that happened to the tech elite. And then I think there's just a political economy of it, which is that these are the most powerful and profitable corporations in the world. And then, of course, the big part of it is the AI bet, right? So that's like the final component. I think they were kind of cooking their brains. They were personally getting radicalized and kind of I think there's a lot of like backlash reaction politics.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were mad at their woke workers. I'm putting that in air quotes. They were a mature industry that wanted to cozy up to power in the government. And then they had this technology that they think is the kind of make or break technology. And their relationship to the state is existential.
Yes.
As we're seeing with the fight over Claude and Anthropic.
Yes, which I was going to ask you about. And that's all so interesting. I mean, I think I'm always curious to hear different people and sort of smart people who look at this in different ways about whether they see what has happened as more ideological, that these sort of tech elites, tech leaders, like genuinely move to the right. And this is legitimately how they feel, that this is the right way to run a country, the right way to run a business, the right way to work with government, or whether it is simply like they are biting their tongues and holding on for 4 years and presenting the president with tchotchkes in the Oval Office when they need to, because they have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders. They have a huge base of employees that they need to support and pay and uphold. And that is just sort of this fundamental, like, I hate this guy, but I have a business imperative. And which of those two sort of feels weightier to different people has been interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's different individuals on different side of that. I mean, I think
sure, yeah,
I
they're
think
also
Bezos
not all
gotten,
the same person.
I think Bezos has gotten very right wing in his personal politics.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he was ever a liberal by any stretch of the imagination, but I think he's just. I mean, obviously Musk has got
Elon be Elon,
yeah, the terminal brainworms.
Yeah.
But like, Tim Cook, I don't know. You know, I think that's an example.
He looks deeply uncomfortable, but he won't say anything about it. Yes.
So yeah, I don't know, and I think the folks at Anthropic are interesting because I think they're sort of, they seem like they're the last gasp of this older version of sort of soft progressive tech.
Yes.
You know, and again, I don't. These are not like social justice warriors or
no.
We're not talking about the labor movement.
No one needs to give them any sort of peace prizes or major awards for this.
I think Dario Amodei is not a person who is like consumed by seething and toxic right-wing reaction.
I do not think that at all.
No, he clearly is not that. In fact,
I think he's consumed by other things.
Yeah,
the sort of existential. The existential thinking around artificial intelligence, I think, feels very, very prominent for him.
Totally.
Which I think is one of the reasons that we saw what happened with that company and the Department of War, if I may call it that, is that to him this very much is a life or death situation.
Yeah. You know, it's now a joke line that the Sergey Brin and Larry Page's "Don't Be Evil" model for Google.
Right.
But again, like that was, it looks ridiculous now, but I think it was genuinely felt at the time. And I also think they thought, again, this sort of the trajectory of how this happens. When Google was created, it was the perfect example of like genuinely building a better mousetrap.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I was searching the internet at the time. All the searches were bad.
Yeah.
Google came along and it was
very good.
So much better. And it was better in a way that transformed the usability of the internet. And I think they thought, well, we're providing a good service and we're going to sell advertising and like it's a pretty ethical business, which this works pretty well. You sell it out, and then slowly over time, right?
Yeah, things escalated from there.
Things changed.
And here we are. I mean, when you think about looking at the next, we've got 3 more years of this administration, and you think about the level of proximity, of collaboration, of I'll say collusion, you don't have to, but the sort of very close relationships that we see between someone like Sam Altman and the administration. Does that scare you?
Yeah. I honestly was chilled to my core when there was, there's a meeting between the head of Anthropic and the head of the Pentagon in which they can't come to terms on, basically it's a terms of service agreement of implementing Anthropic's Claude model in Pentagon situations. And then the Pentagon throws this temper tantrum that sounds completely deranged, like Bond villain kind of thing. Yeah. And we're gonna try to cut them off from all there are supply chain risks. Like, you can sell NVIDIA chips to the Chinese government.
Yes, but God forbid.
You can't use Claude. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And then for Sam Altman to post this thing being like, hey, we've swooped in and we've made a deal. Look, these companies, particularly those two, which are the two that are startups, right? OpenAI and Anthropic, right? Yeah. They're not the legacy incumbents that, have their own AI models, like, Gemini or whatever. They're on a treadmill. They got to run fast. And they got to raise money, and they are, their revenues are increasing a lot, but their costs are increasing arguably faster.
Yeah.
And there's a sort of sense of desperation. And I think the combination of people with a very powerful technology who are banking on making a world-changing fortune, but also have a kind of like Ghosts in Pac-Man like financial burden trailing behind them.
Yes.
Is
to the tune of like many billions of dollars.
Yes. That's a
shocking amounts of money.
That is not, I would not say that is the best setup for like ethical and responsible decision making, or decision making that takes into account the stakeholders involved. And I think that's incredibly terrifying.
It is really scary. It's scary. And I want to ask you a little bit more about how you're thinking about AI. I think you've called yourself a lame centrist. I would say I probably fall into a similar camp, at least in the context
on the AI debate.
On the debate,
yes,
sorry,
yes.
Not when it comes to what OpenAI should or should not be doing with the Department of War.
Yes.
But the conversation around it, very polarized. You've got the doomers, you've got the boomers, very sort of overly simplified arguments. I would say in general, I think we spend too much time like ping-ponging between those two extreme views, and maybe not enough time talking about the practical implications or like the potential future scenarios that we really should be taking seriously. You posted on Blue Sky that the left needs to, quote, start thinking seriously about the AI hype being true. Tell me more about that, because I remember seeing you post that or something to that effect, and many strong reactions.
The thing I like about Blue Sky is that I think it's a place that is, the kind of general vibe around AI is like, this sucks, I hate it. And
yes.
And I think in a world in which it's being kind of shoved down our throats and there's like,
it's exhausting.
Billions being spent to make us love it. Like that's a very useful perspective.
Yeah.
It's also the case that, the thing that I'm most worried about is the job replacement issue. I think a world in which all of these jobs that people have right now, from coders to first-year law associates to the administrators who work at large health insurance companies, work at hospitals, the world in which those are automated in a relatively short period of time, it's going to cause some pretty profound dislocation.
And is your general sense that not enough people, maybe people on the left, are taking that seriously? That there's like a head in the sand kind of phenomenon?
I think there's an idea that if you take that seriously, you're ceding to their own propaganda about how useful their product is.
Do you think that's true?
Well, no, I don't. I mean, I think there's a huge question about how quickly this is all going to happen.
Yeah.
But I also just I can see it. I mean, I use several different LLMs for different things, and
I was going to ask you a little bit about like your personal use cases.
I have been using them more because I think I want to understand what they do.
Yeah.
For instance, like Notebook LLM, where you can upload sources and then you can use it to navigate from those sources is extremely useful.
Yeah.
So that you're not getting hallucinations, and it's also citing back to something. So if I say like, what date did this thing happen? This obscure historical detail that that won't be Googleable, A, because Google no longer really works, but B, because it's embedded in a PDF of a scholarly article I've uploaded to you. So there's lots of useful ways of using it when you're bounding sources, particularly for research purposes. But it's just manifestly getting better. Like, obviously, I mean, it's just like this idea that it's not is insane.
Yeah.
And the idea that it's not going to start to touch like jobs people do also seems insane.
Yeah. I mean, now, I have a few friends who are very senior level software engineers who until very recently, maybe December, thought this was just so ridiculous.
Yes.
They were like, our CEOs won't stop talking about it. They're insufferable. This is just a ridiculous toy. It's the new metaverse. Yep. It's the latest tech fad. And then I think it was the Claude Code release that all of a sudden they are writing book proposals. Yeah. They're trying to use AI to like launch businesses. Like they're trying to figure out like what's my next thing. Because I'm in my 50s and I want to work another 10 or 15 years. I need to work. And I don't think I'm going to have a job in a few years. And that for me, just sitting and having a drink with them and listening to them talk about that was pretty jarring, actually.
Yeah, and I think, again, part of the problem is I think that we should have some clarity about the business case proposition of this technology is exactly this. Like, the reason that they think they can sell this to people is that if you're paying a first-year associate at a law firm to do something and you're paying them $120,000 and you can sell them a tailored version of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini that's law-specific that can basically replicate that work for 60 or 80 or 90. I mean, think about how much money revenue that is for you, right? If you can sell that. And also it's a savings for them. And the only problem is that someone's out of a job, right? That's the business case. So like part of the problem is if you start to talk about that, it does feel like you're seeding
Well, I was about to
their
say,
propaganda
I mean, I think
business
when you get that reaction from the left, it's like, but I don't like this, and I don't want this to be the case. It cannot be the case that all of these elites and oligarchs in Silicon Valley are telling me that I'm not going to have a job. I don't accept that. Yeah. And so what would it look like to you for, quote unquote, the left to start to take that more seriously? How does that manifest?
I mean, I think you got to start thinking about like job protections. How do we want to deal with that?
You mean like meaningful regulation?
Yeah, meaningful regulation.
I mean,
well,
I'm
laughing
a little bit because
first of all, we should be regulating AI. I don't know how. I think the idea that it's like
terrifying,
totally unregulated is insane.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer. I just the big thing I think is it does seem possible to me. I think I'm radically uncertain about the future trajectory. If you take a step back and you think about automation, right? Like agriculture is wildly automated. We use far, far fewer people than we used to per acre and per productivity. Manufacturing has gotten more and more automated. It's both been outsourced and also automated. What we call knowledge work is going to maybe get automated in the same way. That's not like a crazy thing to think.
It's not crazy. No, I think it's uncomfortable.
That's the point of the technology is to do that.
Yeah.
There's use cases that already seem like it's pretty good at it. It's going to develop future. And so the question of like, well, what does that mean and look like? I mean, and I think partly that's going back to real blue sky thinking. I mean, go back to, John Maynard Keynes wrote this great essay called On the Economic Prospects of Our Grandchildren that he talks about, I think it's in the 1920s, of like, what happens when we just solve the economic problems and because we have enough and no one has to work anymore? It didn't go that direction, and I doubt it'll go this direction too.
Right.
But I do think the lesson of both that and the kind of 1990s economic consensus that I think really was destructive and fundamentally was what they have in common is a redistribution from labor to capital. I mean, we just this year, hit the highest share of national income for capital versus labor of all time. To be thinking in a broad sense of like, well, if all these jobs were automatable, like if you didn't need people to do all these things, what do we want people doing? What does society do? Like these are we're so locked into. I mean, the reason I like the Keynes essay is we're just locked into like where are the good jobs going to be?
Yeah.
And work has changed over time and productivity has increased. And the big thing is like, well, what do you want? What should a person have a shot at? What should they be guaranteed? What should they have a shot at in a wealthy society like ours? And how do we order the society fairly to do that? And that's like real first principle stuff. But I do think in some ways this calls for some real first principles thinking.
And I don't know that I want Donald Trump to be the person, making those calls.
No,
so
I mean,
the timing is very unfortunate.
No, and I think, but I mean, the saving grace is he's not going to make those calls because he's just going to let the AI companies run rampant and do whatever they want.
Sure.
But I also think that like small acts of resistance, I think like people at the grassroots level fighting data centers, is that like the solution? No. But is it a way to operationalize this sentiment? Which is like, wait a second, you're telling me this is going to replace all of us. This thing is driving up. It's now 7% of total U.S. electricity consumption.
It's wild. Yeah.
It's driving up local electricity prices. It's intentionally being created as a technology that will move the distribution of national income from labor to capital. And you want to build one in my town? No. Like that's a totally good, legitimate, actionable way to start.
Well, I think a small act of resistance in the context of data centers is a bit of a hopeful place for us to end. But before we do, I want to play a very quick game that we invented. I don't know if you were briefed on this ahead of time, but it's too late now. It's called Control-Alt-Delete.
Okay.
So I want to know, what piece of technology would you love to control? What piece would you love to so alter or change? And what would you love to delete? And people have been very generous in their interpretations of that question. Someone tried to control the weather, and I didn't have the heart to tell them that that is not technology.
I mean, I guess I want to control AI.
Yes, well...
Because... I guess if I trust myself maybe more than Sam Altman. So.
Arguably, I would trust you more than most of the people involved in AI. So that sounds good to me.
I mean, yeah, I guess if I could control it, I'd figure out a humane method. I'll be the one.
It's Chris Hayes.
I'm the one.
He's in.
Alt I've got, which is I would love to alter internet search so that it works again.
Yeah, what's your beef there? What's going on with your searches?
I just think that it's gotten so bad.
It's not great.
I think the quality of the product of just Google search particularly. There's other ones that people suggest that I've used as well, but essentially it's all it's been displaced now by AI partly because search got so bad.
Yeah.
And so. But it's nice to search things and be able to find them, and that's become more and more difficult.
Do you just get that big AI box that
first
takes
you
over
get the
your
big AI
phone
box.
and you have to X out of it? And then
you also get the big AI box, but you also get overwhelmed by ads, and you also just the search does not surface things that you're looking for as well as it used to.
Well, if Google is listening.
It's broken. I mean, it's really gotten bad. Here's my delete.
Okay.
Well, I want to get rid of cell phone calls and replace them with landline quality calls.
Is it the device being used that you have an issue with, or is it the caliber of the voice on the other side?
I find talking on the cell technology is the highest level of failure that we tolerate from any technology in our lives.
Just in terms of the service being patchy?
If your oven just shut off as often as a call dropped, or you couldn't hear someone, or your alarm didn't go off as many times, or your computer just didn't turn on as many times as you can't hear someone or a call drops, it's insane.
We would be in the streets.
No one would. Yeah. No one would tolerate it.
No.
And it's the reason people text all the time and don't talk. And the other thing that I hate about cell phone calls, FaceTime audio can fix this, WhatsApp audio a little bit, is that they don't have what's called side tone.
What is that?
Okay. When you were in junior high, I think we're roughly same cohort. When you were in 12 or 13 or 14 and you would go home after school and talk on the phone for hours.
Oh, yeah.
You would be, when you were talking on that phone, that landline, you would be hearing your own voice through the receiver in what's called side tone. Because the way that a landline works is in the same way that when you have cans on, you're doing a podcast.
Yeah.
And you're getting your own voice in your ears.
Yep. Okay.
A landline does that. And it is such a better, more pleasurable way to talk to someone because you can calibrate your own volume. Cell phones don't have side tone, which is why people shout when they're on phones, why people sound weird, why you sound weird, why you can't actually have good and intimate conversations on cell phones. It's why people always want to put their headphones in, even though the headphone doesn't even give you side tone. So this is my big, I guess that's an alt because I like to bring side tone into cell, but I basically just want to like delete cell vocal technology and start over.
That is so specific and so like well studied. I really applaud that. I love that one. Chris Hayes, thank you so much. This was fabulous.
Thanks.